Hello and welcome, everyone.
A couple more just coming in. Okay, I think that's all of you in and connected. Thanks very much for coming. This is the final session of the 2023 Festival of Trusteeship. So we are going to power through now a session on overcoming imposter syndrome. Thanks very much for coming. As with all of the sessions throughout the week, this session is being recorded and you'll get access to it as soon as possible. Please stay muted on the call unless asked to unmute. Closed captions are available, you just need to turn them on. Please do use the chat function to ask questions and share your experiences. There's been lots of great chat throughout the week in that chat bot, so do have a look. But equally, if you feel like you want to ignore it because it's too distracting, no one will be offended. You can absolutely do that too. And the last two things I have to do before passing over to Faith at Ecclesiastical is thank our media partner Third Sector for their support, and to Ecclesiastical because their support has meant that this strand, the aspiring trustee strand, we've been able to put on for free. So Faith, over to you.
No, I don't think we've got Faith with us.
Faith isn't here. Well, okay, thanks Faith and Ecclesiastical anyway. Sapna, over to you.
Thanks, Leon. Welcome, everybody, to this panel session on imposter syndrome. So we've got a fantastic panel for you today. We've got Catherine Jackson, who is a risk manager at the British Heart Foundation and trustee of Wandsworth Oasis. We've got Candia Apadu, who is communications manager at Cool Farm Alliance, which I want to learn more about, and trustee at the Horton Arts and Heritage Society. We've also got Michael Tiberadi, a performance coach and contracted program manager at Natural England and a board member at the Institute of Leadership. And last but not least, we have Ben Hunt, sector insight lead at Strive Hire and trustee at Brightside. I am your host for this evening for our grand finale of Festival of Trusteeship. My name's Sapna. I'm one of the associates at Getting On Board. I'm a lawyer by profession, but I also am a consultant and I sit on various boards, which I'm not going to go into. We're going to get straight into the chat on imposter syndrome. So to get us warmed up, I want to ask the panel about really, when does, because often when we are joining boards, we're naturally stepping out of our comfort zone a little bit. And sometimes when you step out of your comfort zone, it's natural to feel a little bit anxious, to feel humbled by the environment, to look at everyone in the room and think, oh my gosh, they all know so much more than I do. And I guess what's the difference between those kind of very natural feelings, those tickles in your tummy versus some really debilitating imposter syndrome? What does that look like for you? So, Ben, I'm going to kick off with you.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question, and I think there is a natural way in which when you are appointed to a board and it's whether it's in your subject area or not, where there is a natural nervousness going into an environment like that. I remember when I was first a trustee, it was when I was 20 years old and I was elected a sabbatical officer at my student union, and people might know in the call student unions are also charities. And I remember this very long going into a room for a committee with a very long oblong table at King's with about 15 very eminent academics sat round this table, and they were all making decisions around quality. And I was obviously a much younger member going into that environment. And I was also late to that session, and I had no real clue what it was about. I had read papers, but there had been no real formal induction. There had been, nothing like that. And, I approached the room, I arrived, the chair for me to sit in for that was at the other end of the room. So I had to walk around everyone. Everyone's looking at me in the room, and it's almost this gaze as you're going round. And you feel very out of place in an environment like that. So I feel like whilst in that experience, there was a natural nervousness around being in a completely new space, being a student and then becoming a trustee, which was my first trustee role, which was very nerve-wracking and trying to navigate the papers. Actually, I think there is something structural which is quite important in having a proper induction and meeting people and trustees before, and having some form of briefing before you go into that form of that sort of environment. So I would always advocate for, reflecting on that experience and saying, is it just that I haven't been in the environment yet, and there may be structural reasons for that, or is it that I need more support in this, and asking for that? Because if you've applied for the right organization and you know their values and they match yours, there will be that support there.
Thanks, Ben. It almost sounds like you're saying, the structural things around you meant that wasn't just a fleeting feeling for you. It was something that kind of stuck around a bit longer than it should have, because the support wasn't there. Catherine, do you want to come in on this one?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a great question. And it's really made me think of my natural go-to when I step out of my comfort zone is, oh my goodness, I can't do this. And it's allowed me sort of having this awareness to drill down into what I can't do. And I try and sort of find the evidence. So what I can't, I can't do this highlights my sort of sometimes lack of confidence, where I think it crosses over into imposter syndrome. And I don't like using the imposter syndrome flag, and we'll probably come on to it later. I think it's linked to shame for me. But when it crosses over into imposter syndrome, I'm doing other people's thinking for them. I think that they've made a mistake. They don't think I can do this really. And then I feel that I'm in a bit of a hole. So that's where it's really difficult for me. I think what Ben said is really key. What's helped me get out of that particular hole, and a few times, is that structure and those briefings and that level of comfort. And that could be, from a trustee point of view, having a connection with a buddy, having a pre-meet before you go into that room. That sounds terrifying, Ben. Going into that oblong, with that oblong desk. Having that connection, regular briefings with the CEO. So yeah, it is a difference between natural nerves, and it passes over into sort of something quite shame-based for me. So I'm trying to find the difference.
Thank you for sharing that, Catherine. What about you, Michael? How is it manifested for you?
Yeah, so I think these are all very good points. And for me personally, it comes down to isolation. Sometimes you can create a sense of isolation because you feel like you don't belong within a space or community, so to speak. And so with that in mind, it's almost like, okay, you may be in this box that's very defined, but it's dissipating that box or expanding it in such a way where, Catherine was saying, you meet up with buddies or the CEO or other sort of members of that trusteeship to really get a flavor and a lay of the land, because you're not going to know everything. That's definitely a fact. But there should be a development of an awareness of the sort of skills, strengths that you have that you can contribute at some point. But it's also understanding that you don't have to rush into this in terms of contributing straight away. I know when I first joined this trustee board, I made it clear from the get-go that I'm not gonna rush into this, but obviously I'm knee-deep in terms of months X, Y, and Z in terms of being in a space, and now I'm making more of a valid, solid contribution, because it does take time. So it's recognizing that it's a bit of a journey, it's a bit of an experience, but also you are valuable, and these people have seen this, hence why you're in this space. So those are my thoughts there.
Thank you. Candia, what about you?
Yeah, I think I completely echo everything that's been said already. I think for me, and I really like what Catherine said about the stigma around imposter syndrome. Like, I don't like calling it that, because I do think it has really negative connotations. And I think, even joining this call, I was really nervous, and joining this panel, I was really nervous. And it is like trying to be able to find certain places and positions and safe spaces where you can have these conversations. And I think that, like, being nervous is a good thing. It's an adrenaline rush, and it's a great feeling to have. But again, it's like often seen or spoken about as like a really bad thing. So I think it's like, for me, when I applied for my trustee role, I had actually taken like 2 years off work. So I did a lot of like value searching, purpose searching, like really try to redefine like where was my position in a workspace. And you know, I think I got to a point where I was a bit like, I know what my values are and I know what I'm really good at, and I need to be able to find the right trusteeship that enables me to like fly and flourish. And I think I spent a lot of time trying to specifically find something, and also I was really lucky with my like interview process, and I felt really confident talking about like my history and like certain things I've never spoken about at any interview or any like to any peers before. And for me, that was a bit of an aha moment of like, I think I'm getting over this imposter syndrome thing, or like whatever it is. And I'm not saying I just said I'm coming into this call, it doesn't go, but it's it's like a learning process. And I think, you know, now I'm trying to find ways of like pushing myself out of my comfort zone, hence why I'm joining this panel. Like I don't do public speaking and I'm really bad at it. Like all these things are going on in my head, like, oh God, I'm still talking, why am I talking? But it's like, you know, I'm learning to just be myself, you know, that and so, and I think that is part of battling this imposter syndrome. Like it's okay to just be yourself. Like I don't need to be anyone else actually. And I was able to bring that into my interview process at being a trustee. And I would say, I can't remember who said it now, but sorry, but the buddying system, absolutely key. I did not have that. I was thrown in and I was like, what the hell is this? But my learning from that is to like not let that happen again. I'm not going to let the next trustees come in and not have certain systems and processes in place, because it was way too difficult for me. And I did think the other day, I was like, I would have probably left 6 months ago if I didn't have the confidence in myself. So, you know, but I'm not going to let that happen going forward. So yeah, that was a really long answer. Sorry.
No, it was wonderful. Thank you. And I think it's really interesting how, you know, what you all said was so interconnected. The reality is that what it comes back to is that shame and that isolation that stops you from getting the help you need. And actually, that's a big part of actually the more isolated you feel, the less you feel able to sort of go in and say it's okay and say, actually, I need X, Y, and Z. And you don't feel so unreasonable for asking. And it's something that you really do learn along the way. Thank you all. So the next question we were going to move on to was, how do you think different people experience imposter syndrome in different groups? You know, people with different characteristics. Do you think that changes depending on who you are? Do you think that makes you more or less likely to feel that way? Ben, you're nodding, so I'm going to go to you first again.
I should stop doing that. Maybe stop actively listening so much. No, I mean, I absolutely think it is experienced in different ways. And I think, I mean, one of the, you know, the example that we were talking through before, there's obviously a sort of knowledge gap as well coming into something, and there's a sort of expertise gap when you might be from a particular area coming into a charity and you might know lots about the particular industry, or you might not, and you might be coming in with a particular skill set. So there's that sort of epistemic gap almost, which almost anyone can feel. I think there are a few other things, and one of them is that it's assumed in our society that, you know, people will hold positions of power automatically in some ways, obviously, and it's this structural point that we were discussing before. And I think often, and I think it was referred to before, that can be among all sorts of protected characteristics and along socioeconomic backgrounds, for example. So if someone is acquainted with a particular type of schooling or education, they're more used to being in a more formal environment, they're more used to being in a committee structure, they will take to those environments more than those who haven't ever been exposed to those types of environments. I was never exposed to those environments in my education, and I found it completely alien to what I was used to, whereas others obviously had been. So I think that socioeconomic side definitely, and the sort of class lines can make that experience different. And I think there's also an assumption about who will, you know, hold particular roles, as well as how you individually experience things. There's the sociological issue of who generally is holding particular roles, and obviously people are are more dominant in particular spaces, who have, who are sort of white straight men often, who have been privately educated. That is the stereotypical view. I mean, the Sutton Trust has found that privately educated people are 5 times more likely to be in top roles, for example, than others, and we see that play out in our society in some of these structures. And there's the sort of leisure of time sometimes to take trustee positions as well. So I think because of some of those power dynamics, and I see because someone else has commented around sexuality and gender in the chat as well, all of those things can play into it and play into those power dynamics.
Because I was also thinking about you as that young trustee. You described going into that room, and I think often, when you're the youngest in the room, or you're the, whatever difference you have, it makes it that little bit harder. It's a barrier to kind of overcome. And did you notice that you were, did you feel treated any differently, say, to some of the more mature trustees that you were around the board with?
I think definitely back then. I think sometimes still a bit now in some senses, because I'm a trustee under the age of 30, just under the age of 30. But I am still clinging on to
that still counts.
Yeah, with that young trustee mantle. But I think when I was 20, definitely, I think it was a really unusual environment. And I think I don't know how many people in the room are acquainted with sort of student unions or maybe young trustees in general, but when you're in a position like that, particularly in some of the larger universities, and my professional background is also in higher education, you're projected into a load of committees and environments upon which you have no clue or expertise, and you have a year term. You have to come up to speed with an awful lot of things. You have to form relationships with an awful lot of people who are often, as academic colleagues, utterly used to a collegiate system, used to a committee system, used to a huge amount of papers and academic governance, which is great and robust, and in student unions that can play out as well. But you have no idea. And so I think there is an age thing there that you can feel in yourself. You sound really naive, and maybe you're perceived as that. There are also fantastic people who we've been reflected before, who take the time, and I can see in the chat, who take the time to support you through that, who are valued, and attracting young trustees is part of that, and part of taking the time to mentor as well. But I think that there definitely was that from some people, and so you can perceive how it naturally is the case, because it's very alien to them, maybe having a young student do that. But it's also about unlearning some of those behaviors and thinking about how the structure of those committees work as well.
Yeah. Candia, do you want to come in on this one? I see you nodding away too.
Yeah, I was nodding because I was also thinking, kind of forgotten the question, but that's because I was so ingrained into what you were saying, Ben. So
what do you think characteristics make a difference to your experience?
Yeah, I can only talk about it from my own experience, and I didn't I'm trying to not be negative about it, but I didn't feel that I was ready or relevant to be a trustee until much later in life. And so I'm not a young trustee in the eyes of the age brackets, but I have kind of taken that as a learning, as to think, but why is that? Like, why did I not feel that this space was for me? And what are, it's really hard to look back and think about from my life and go, what were the barriers there in the first place? Because I can't remember, and all of these things. But I think for me, it's like, again, not letting that happen again going forward. And I think one of the things I kind of touched upon in my first answer was like, I addressed my differences and my characteristics in my application, in my first interview, that I was like, any situation where I'm walking in to job related or the trustee interview, I'm 99% going to be the only person of color and a woman of color. But I just say it at the beginning. I let people know that those situations are terrifying for me. Like and it is this confidence thing again, but it's also just not really worrying about other people's reaction to it, because it's me. That's just, I've got certain barriers or challenges, whatever it is, that I have to think about and face before I feel comfortable and confident. So I think yeah, being able to bring that to my trustees and the board was a huge, I don't want to say it was like why they recruited me, because I think there was like a lot more than that, but I think what it did, it planted the seed for them to then go, okay, they now to give me the space to talk about certain things, because I am looking at like community engagement. And so I did actually say to them, you can't talk about community engagement in an area that I grew up in if you haven't got a person of colour on your board. Like, you can't do that. That's basically what happened to me growing up in the 90s. I'm not letting that happen again. And so it was that kind of, yes, I can bring a different perspective, but it is more than that. So I think, yeah, just having the space, the safe space, I think, to talk about those things.
No, it's interesting, Kanya, because we, in our navigating barrier session, we were talking a bit about how actually being open about it protects you from entering spaces where you're not going to be as welcome. Actually, being upfront, you know, it gives you that level of comfort and getting to that place.
It does,
but we spend a lot of time in our lives masking and assimilating and all of those things. And again, coming back to that shame, hiding the fact that we need extra things or different things.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. Michael, do you want to come in at all?
Yeah, for sure. Want to make sure I've got the question, but you know, even statistically, I'm not supposed to be here. You know, if you think about it and you look at the numbers, I think I represent 0.8% of trustees / non-execs, or whatever you want to call it. So when you look at those numbers, that can be blinding. I mean, when first applying for the trusteeship, like Candy, I was like, why am I even applying? Well, I know I believe in this institution, what they're doing and everything else. I truly do. But am I capable? Now, to answer your question, undoubtedly, I think characteristics do contribute to imposter syndrome. And it's a collection of societal sort of pressures and norms, whatever they are, and how we perceive reality in ourselves. So yeah, it's not just a mindset personal development thing, it's a very real thing as well. You know, you will see bias behaviors and characteristics that are played out in some way that may trigger a bias or confirmation in your head, which contributes more to an imposter syndrome sort of like situation. Now, whether that bias was actually deliberate or not is another thing, but it exists. And so it's something that needs to be spoken about and addressed much more through just really voicing it out. Like, again, like Candia said, I am nervous, I am this person, X, Y, and Z. And, you know, organizations being in a position where they truly do make an effort to ensure there is fair recruitment of trustees across a broad span of spectrums. It's difficult to do because there's lots of different types of people in the world, you know, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't try, because we're always trying to get to a good level of standards or whatever it may be. I think, you know, going back to what Ben was saying in terms of the socioeconomic front and everything else, that is definitely a thing. I mean, you guys can check out something known as the Marmot Report of 2020, which talks about those divides in terms of class and everything else, where there are real challenges and real pressures and real problems that exist in a small sort of space of society and bigger spaces of society that doesn't fit the idea of what a board, you know, represents or looks like. I mean, if I was to say to people, who would you expect to be on a board? Many of you would probably have a similar image in your mind. I may be guessing this, I may be completely wrong, but that is represented in reality, because that's what we have at the moment in terms of disproportion. So of course it contributes to that imposter syndrome again. But for anyone who's applying, do your best to block it out. And seriously, block it out and focus on how you can provide value. Learn from the experience. It's okay to learn through this experience, and yeah, support that way as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Catherine, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. God, I really echo what people on the panel have said. It's so interesting and really valid. And for me, I've been reflecting that I think for me, points of difference have really triggered my imposter syndrome. And for me, it was highlighted. So I was I'm 48 and I'm going through perimenopause, which is a joy if anyone's there. But it really highlighted my anxiety and what I wanted to. I sort of actively became more invisible. I had this thing of hiding in the long grass. I was there and thereabouts, and I found it really difficult, and it was a really was a really confusing time. So that, because I was perceiving myself as very different, and my age, working in, at the time, quite a young organisation, I had a lot of trouble with it. But someone said something in the chat that really jumped out at me, and I find now that I relish the discomfort a little bit more. Being uncomfortable is like where the magic happens. You know, being uncomfortable is awful, don't get me wrong. I'm not, but I do try and lean into it a little bit more, and that's where growth is. I also I got a coach as well when I realized I was struggling and finding a lot difficult. I got a coach, and I got a really good coach. Oh my God, she's fantastic. But having that level of accountability. So if it's in my head, it's a fact. Whatever nonsense sits in there. And when I voice it and say it to a coach or to a trusted friend who will push me to find the evidence, that really helps. And sort of that doing it scared kind of thing. And, there's various Post-its on my desk that remind me of those.
Feel fear and do it anyway.
Oh, a bit, yeah. But the whole, I'm not expected to know it yet. I don't know it now. I don't know it yet. That growth mindset of a fixed mindset. Something that Michael said really jumped in as well, which is that, what if, if not you, who? Get yourself in there, elbow yourself in, find your space. So that I try and do that a lot as well.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's just more of the same.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just add something? Sorry,
yeah.
just something that Catherine just said reminded me of like having a coach. I think is a great idea, but also just having cheerleaders. So I didn't know my self-worth which is sad, until other people told me certain things. And it was only then that I was like, okay. So I think, and you can have them in different aspects of your life. Like I've got people at work and trustees and friends, and it's just, we don't complement each other that much, and we're quite and I don't know if it's like a woman thing or I don't know what it is, but I'm trying to just get better at complimenting and asking for feedback and all this stuff, and having just people in your corner is just the best thing. I think
it is. Asking for help as well, whatever form you need it in, is so critical. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to chat about was Ruchka Abdulshan and Jodie Ambury made the case that we should stop telling women that they have imposter syndrome. And their argument was that the reality is it's not just about our perception of ourselves, it's about how the world perceives us. It's about the credibility deficit that certain people experience because of their characteristics, because they don't look like the expert in the room, or people's perception of what the expert in the room should look like. It means that they've got to work that bit harder. And when you belong to a minoritized group, you are working harder. And I think we've seen that theme come up so much across the whole festival, about people talking about their experiences of where they do have to work that bit harder, they do have to mask, they do have to talk about where they have to talk in a certain way or act in a certain way so that they fit in within the rooms that they're going into. So I wanted to ask you all a little bit about that. To what extent do you think it's us and it's all in our heads, or is it everyone else too? Catherine?
I would say a little bit of both, but I think sort of the societal norms impact on what I think. So it's a bit chicken and egg. I really got a lot from the article that you talked about, and the thing that jumps out was that calling it imposter syndrome, of having it be imposter syndrome, it's a lot to bear. If you're struggling anywhere and then you've got that to deal with, it's quite difficult. And that's what links back to the shame aspect that we were talking about earlier. It's not sort of, if it can be switched in some way, if we can champion the ambitious nature, the challenge that we go through, the resilience, it feels very negative. It is negative. It's not celebrated in any way. And I think that's what having that open communication with people on your board, people in the organisation, identifying not as a nebulous, we'd like you because, you know, something over here. It's you add value here, here, and here. This is how you demonstrate your impact. I think that would be really valuable looking at a trustee. But yeah, it's a difficult question to answer.
Okay, Michael, what about you?
Yeah, so if you could repeat the question, I've got an answer, but I just want to make sure I'm capturing it well.
So the article talks about how we should stop calling it imposter syndrome, and it argues that we should move over to talking about things like credibility deficits, which turns the focus more from how we perceive ourselves to how the world perceives us, and how the world maybe makes us work a bit harder than other people because we don't fit the mold of what they expect.
Yeah, it's a challenging one, but it's almost like saying there's a difference between saying, you know, I'm famished and and saying I'm hungry, as an example. You know what you feel. And in some ways you can't diminish an experience based on someone's recommendation of, you know, verbal gymnastics, if you want to call it that. If people are calling it imposter syndrome and that's what they're feeling, that's what they're feeling. And so there needs to be some sort of concerted effort to ensure that there is, one, the right level of awareness around this. So this is observing things, speaking to different people, all of that kind of stuff there. And two, the appropriate measures and support to ensure that that imposter syndrome is diminished. Really, that imposter syndrome is, okay, there is a part responsibility on self where that exists. But at the same time, if you don't have a system that has the right level of support and challenge, healthy challenge, I'm not talking about being aggressive or violent, but healthy challenge, you create that right level of psychological safety, you know, where people don't feel silly to ask questions or ask for feedback, or it's that feeling silly bit or feeling shame. So there is obviously some sort of aura or energy that allows people to feel this way. So create sort of like systems or processes or whatever to minimize those things. So in answer to your question, I don't think it should be changed. Call a spade and focus on managing those difficulties and challenges.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Ben?
Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating question, and I think that there's a lot to take from how everyone's responded already. I mean, I think it is chicken and egg. I think, as Catherine was saying, I think you can feel that you have a lack of knowledge going into a new space, which is natural, as I was saying before, and there are sort of natural power asymmetries within that, where you can feel out of your depth. But there are opportunities to grow as well from knowing that and having that feeling, as Michael was saying. If you have the right psychological safety, you have the right mutual recognition, I think there's space to grow in that, which is really positive. I do think it's helpful to think about a credibility deficit as well. And I do think words matter, because words obviously set norms in situations. And I think one of the important things with the notion of a credibility deficit is that it's about the perception of others hearing a speaker, and the speaker is not credible, and the injustice that can be caused by that. So it puts the burden of responsibility back on those listening rather than to the speaker. Whereas an imposter syndrome, it makes it seem like, oh, it's sort of your fault, but the burden is on you. That is my sort of takeaway from it, and sometimes conceptually the reading of it. I think the use of syndrome can be a bit pathologizing and make it appear that, you know, there's something almost mental, like negatively mental about the whole concept, which I find slightly difficult. And I think secondly, there is a useful analogy here with terminology in higher education. So the area that I work in, where there's been a persistent gap in first class degrees and second class degrees between black and white students for decades. And the terminology that we originally spoke about with that was the black attainment gap. And that made out in a similar way that it was the students' fault for having an attainment gap. And that has evolved to being around the black awarding gap, because it's about the awarding of, it's about the action of awarding the qualification from the person marking it and from the communal structure, rather than being about the individual. So I think in a similar sense, looking at our terminology here and thinking about how do we reflect, the structural barriers that can be there for people entering new trustee roles and from minoritized communities is really important.
Thank you, Ben. Candia, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think everyone's been articulated a response so perfectly. I think for me, if I was to focus on the words, and you take the words imposter and syndrome as two individual words, they are both so negative. And I think what Ben said about the word syndrome itself, it does create all of this stuff in my head of it feeling like they're all bad things, and it shouldn't be. So I only wrote a blog a couple of months ago about imposter syndrome, and then completely in the last couple of months I've been reading about why it shouldn't be called that anymore. And all it is a confidence gap, that's all it is. And it was actually, is that it? Is it just admitting that we have these areas of improvement that we all need to make, and just going, do you know what? It isn't imposter syndrome. I'm just learning, and I'm openly admitting to learning, and we're all exploring. And I think, Michael, you might have touched upon this. It's focusing on the solutions part. I don't like, it's labeling something for the sake of, sometimes it feels like a buzzword, and it's it's not, it's how, it is how we feel, but we all feel it in different ways. And I think that to me is why I'm actively trying to not talk about imposter syndrome, even though it's really hard. And that's what this subject is about. But it's I'm just trying to use different wordings in my head, just so, because I can default to it. When I'm in a meeting, oh, it's just imposter syndrome. And I'm actually, but what is it? What's the little bit that I'm trying to focus on? Is it that I don't like public speaking? Fine, cool, admit it, learn from it and move on from it, sort of thing. So, it's not that easy, by the way. That was but yeah, so I do think wording is important, and I do think it needs to somehow be readdressed and spoken about in a more positive way, because we've all got things that we can learn from this whole thing.
No, I absolutely love that. I think we should replace imposter syndrome with confidence gap, and replace credibility deficit with credibility gap. I think that's a new way forward we've found already. Thank you. Okay, so interesting, Candia. You started to move on to solutions, and that is my next question for the panel: is what do you think that boards, that organizations can do to make people feel and to minimize the kind of imposter syndrome, the confidence gap, all of those things that they might feel walking in the door? So, Candy, I'm going to let you continue with your. We're almost there anyway.
I know. Yeah. I feel like this question is probably going to be a real collaborative, answering between all of us, and anyway. So anyone chip in. I'm going through this at the moment with my board, because I only felt comfortable and confident applying for the trustee role for the various reasons I've kind of touched upon already. That doesn't mean the safeguarding is there and that doesn't mean that other people are going to feel like that when they apply for, and this is talking specifically for my trustees, but I wish I had the opportunity to speak to other trustees. Actually, no, I'm going to go back before that. I wish I knew what a trustee was. Honest to God, 20 odd years ago, nah, no idea. It wasn't for me. And I think, Michael, you said it. I think of a board, I'm not on it. I'm still not on it. Like, there's a whole barrier there for young people trying to even understand their position on a board to begin with. And so there is some like work that I'm doing to like understand that from, you know, younger generations, like not even asking the questions, you know, what a trustee is, because it might just be so far removed from where they are, but it's really important. Like, we're not going to make it any impact if we just carry on going the way we are. So I know I'm not answering the solutions, but it's because I don't know, because I'm actually learning it at the moment, and I feel like I'm navigating through it at the moment. But I do think a really important part is not forgetting that generation that's coming up, and so important to listen to them. And I don't feel like I'm in a position to make, might sound wrong, to make changes in my board and my role at the moment until I do that, try and do some of that work first. I think the board that I'm on they will let me do that. So they will let me hold workshops with young people in the charity that I'm at and have these conversations. And they know it's not a quick win. You know, this is a 10-year thing, whatever it is. But for me, it's really important to have those conversations. And as much as I don't like being the sole person who's responsible for it just because I'm brown and a woman, it does feel like that responsibility does fall to me a lot, and I will drive it forward because I care about it and I'm passionate about it, but I can't do it by myself. So I think, again, it comes back to this cheerleading. And I think someone put in the chat, like, you need to have allies in the boards that, well, actually, I wouldn't even be on the board if they didn't already agree, have the same beliefs and values. But I think, yeah, having other people who can go on that journey with you is really important. Again, I've just realized I've spoken for ages, so I'm just
do you know, actually, I want to pick a little bit more into that, Kanya, because I think
yeah,
there's a really important thing about how boards often just nominate one person to be the person for safeguarding, or the person for EDI, or the person for engagement, or whatever. And actually, I think sometimes that can be something that fuels imposter syndrome, because you end up alone, and actually there's not the debate or the challenge, that healthy stuff that reassures you that you're getting it right. And it does really fall all on your shoulders. And that can really interact with imposter syndrome. So I'm interested in that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. But I think there are certain conversations that I've had to have where I have said, this is not my responsibility. This is not my sole responsibility. If all of the other trusted, it's written into our, you know, whatever values and everything. If we don't adhere to it, then let's just get rid of it. Do you know what I mean? It's like I don't like speak for speak's sake, and I don't like policies written just to tick a box. And I think being able to challenge that side is bigger for me than delivering the impact side. I think, you know, the trustees on my board today actually said to me, like, it is my different way of thinking. That is the benefit. That is my lived experience. That is what I can bring. I don't have the answers, and I shouldn't. And I think in a way, being able to just say that, again, didn't feel comfortable saying that 10 years ago, because I would have probably burned myself out by trying to fix it all. But I'm just, I'm not doing that anymore. So yeah, I think, yeah. So.
Thank you. Michael, do you want to come in?
Yeah, no, definitely. I don't think it's just the responsibility of the organizations. I don't. I do think they bear some responsibility. Don't get me wrong. And I think there are going to be structural things that they need to do, like your standard training, making sure that quality assurance is on point, governance reviews, etc., etc. All of that stuff needs to be done. What I do think is important is just talking to or working with other trustees regularly. I think that is really important and underrated. That informal chit chat is good because, you know, if you're sort of like rubbing shoulders with other people who may be experiencing what you're experiencing, but hide it better, you can pick that up, you know, and you can ask those little silly questions or whatever it may be in those informal chats. I think there's a wider responsibility just in general, you know, with society to sort of educate people on this stuff. And this is what this is doing. You know, this is part of that process. I think, you know, as I'm sure many of us do on this panel, talk about our experiences when it comes to trusteeship. I think that's really important because, as Candy was saying before, I didn't really know what a trustee was. And I knew within this sort of generation that I'm in, people were just sort of like jumping on boards left, right, and center. It felt like something you were collecting, you know. And it looked good, but I didn't really understand it, you know. And for me, I only wanted to get involved in something if it meant something in terms of, you know, an impact I could possibly be part of, or something I cared about, or possible learning, you know, really and truly. So I think it's a collective responsibility that is bared across the board. So organization wide, one-to-one with different people, but also you as a person to try to find ways to actively educate others about it or educate yourself more about it. You know, it's difficult when you don't know what it is. I definitely bear that. But when you go on your first training and you realize this is how governance is done, you know, you're mind blown and you start applying it to other areas of your life, potentially X, Y, and Z. So yeah, I think it's a bit collective. That's my response.
We all need to be piling the kids into the Young Trustees movement, right?
Yeah, most definitely. I was just going to say one more thing though. What I do on that point, what I do really like seeing is that there's a lot of young people jumping on advisory boards. I think that's great to see, you know, because yeah, it may not have the same rigor, but if you get advisory boards that, you know, implement a certain discipline similar to a trustee board or non-exec board or whatever it may be, that's great practice. That is great practice. So yeah, happy to see that stuff happening.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I think two completely amazing responses, and I think I completely agree that getting more young people engaged in charities and on advisory boards is absolutely vital. My background before, I worked over the last 5 years in the Office of Students of the Regulator for Higher Education, but in student engagement, and part of Brightside is now around youth engagement. So I think, as you were both reflecting, it's absolutely vital for that. And I think it was said before, for the future as well of charities as organizations, and to make sure that there is a pipeline of diverse people and diverse ways of thinking and challenging as well, and sort of evolving what charities can do, and also to equip young people with really, really, you know, important skills, specific discourse. I think we've seen the levels of, you know, externally polarization that's there at the moment in a society, and the debates very quickly reduce into these sort of for and against and binary positions. And actually the collective of charities serving their communities and doing so in a collaborative way and giving power back to beneficiaries, to communities, to whoever that may be as a stakeholder, is vitally important, not just for charities, but for the functioning of our society and the democracy that we have. So I think it's really important to have young people come through, as was reflected. And I think in particular for them, it's really important, just in a practical sense, to have that detailed induction that has been discussed a lot through this conversation, to make sure that you're fostering an environment around psychological safety, and that they have a mentor, and they can also access other networks around, you know, young trustees and growing those skills as well. And I think individually, you know, just going back to the original question, it's really important when you're appointed to a board role to know what you want to get out of it, to know where you might want to grow in yourself, and to discuss that in the organization that you're part of, because there might be things that, as was reflected, they see in you as well that you might want to go that you haven't thought of. And actually it can be really, really beneficial. And these opportunities are so important for that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Catherine, I want to frame the question a little bit different for you. So same question, but I guess you went through, challenging experiences while you were already on the board. So what do you think the board around you could have done to soften that experience for you? What do you think would have made life easier while you were?
No, I didn't actually. Sorry, so I was going through and I applied and successfully got on the board of Wandsworth Oasis after seeing my coach, and it was part of my sort of plan.
Okay, so it's part of the solution.
Yeah, so it was part of the solution for me, very much so. I think to answer the question, the thing that jumps out hugely is that being a trustee doesn't start with your first board meeting at all. And I've worked in corporate governance and as a risk specialist for 15, 20 years. So I've seen it at the other side of the table. I've been writing governance reports for a long, long time. And I've been in rooms that have been in boards that have been a little bit terrifying, actually, very corporate. And so when I was going through my sort of anxiety challenges, I realized that I can't be in those rooms. There's no way I can do this. And so it comes back to what Candy has said right at the beginning. What are my values and how can I keep to my values? And what helps me as a trustee and a relatively new trustee on this side of the table, sort of only 6 months in, is having that briefing, having a really clear relationship and an honest, authentic relationship with the chair of the board as well, having that buddy, having a clear connection to cause was really important. I had to keep reminding myself why I was here, go into community action groups and a wet Thursday night, for example, you're sort of like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
What else was really important? Having clear expectations of what I was bringing to the board. What was my value add? And so my specialism is in risk management and strategic risk management, making sure that I had a clear connection with the strategic objectives. That was primary for me. It wasn't just ticking a box and trotting out a risk register. So it was my values were embedded and a real connection to the cause was important.
Yeah. So we've got a question from Paul in the chat, and he's essentially saying, old white man trustee. You called you old, not me, Paul. But, he's saying, generally he just assumes everyone's okay. They're feeling like he is in the room. And, maybe that's not, I guess it's him coming to the conclusion, maybe that's not the way. Actually, should we be assuming that there maybe is something to know, or at least opening that door for letting people know, or letting people let you know as that chair, what's going on for them? Okay. Oh, lots of hands went up there. Okay, Catherine.
I think it's the word, they assume. I think ask your trustees, how do they feel? Have that space for feedback. Allow them to tell you how they feel. So I think, the whole, if you assume that everyone's all right, fine well that they're probably not. And they're struggling, they might be struggling through. So it's having that really clear, honest communication, fast feedback. That's right.
It's having those annual check-ins and things like that, which is a bit harder now post-COVID, I think, isn't it? As a lot more of this happens online.
Yeah.
Michael, did you want to come in next?
I think Catherine covered it, to be fair. I think a check-in is so underrated,
Yeah.
Hey Ben, how's it going? I just wanted to check in. I really feel like sometimes there's a lot of focus on the structure, the formal, the da. But when it comes to like the informal stuff, that's where the real value add is. So having those informal chats, X, Y, and Z, can make someone feel really valued. And then you may be able to pick up and have a broader awareness to see if tacitly actually there may be something up, so well done for asking the question and calling yourself out as well, because that requires a bravery as well.
Okay, so I'm going to reframe this question for the other two. What do you wish your chair knew?
Well, that's quite good. I've actually got two now as well. So I've just been appointed to another one. So I'll go for the one I'm more acquainted with. I think I think it's what's been reflected, actually. I think uh for me, I actually think it's been a relatively good, experience with the charity that I'm trustee of. I think it would be really beneficial to have those check-ins that Catherine and Michael just reflected on. And to make sure that everyone, I suppose it is that how to foster a sense of psychological safety. And it would be reassuring for me if I knew that other people were being supported through that journey. And I can see in the room, in the trustee setting, that some people might contribute far less than others, and others will contribute more. And there's always going to be a bit of that. But actually, as was just reflected, the point around encouraging that as chair and having an ability to highlight where that's happening and to encourage all the voices in the room, and also to take a step back outside and to go, I've noticed that on particular topics, maybe, you don't feel comfortable to speak out as much. How does that make you feel? Do you feel like you have that feeling? That might be something I've just noticed, and just try and tease that out a bit more and to understand, because it might come to nothing. It might. So I think that proactivity and me being assured that they were assured by everyone else would be really good.
So inclusive leadership training for all. Yeah.
That's
Candia,
it. That's
I think
it summed up. Yeah.
I think you're going to get the final word of this session. We've only got 2 minutes left. So
well,
what do you wish your chair knew?
It's probably going to be quite, I don't have a chair because my chair quit. And so we've got like a rolling chair position. I really struggle with that, by the way. So I do really miss having a clear like direction from a chair. But I do think what Ben was touching upon as well is like, we all have our own individual like unique qualities. And I think it's up to a chair to be able to have that space where we can all shine. So I have had conversations where I'm not a natural speaker in meetings, but I really actively listen, and I'll probably come back in 2 weeks' time to something, but I need that to be okay. And I need that. I don't like being called on in meetings to talk because it's just not how I work. So I think, and I think that just comes back to ways of working and like checking in, like, if someone did notice I was really quiet in a meeting and wanted to check I was okay, because that was my area of expertise. It is just having that. So yeah, I think it's just pretty much what everyone else has covered.
Okay, fantastic. You've left us an extra minute. So any final words before we wrap up the session? No, everybody got the chance to say everything they wanted to say. Thank you. That's gone incredibly well. Thank you all. It's been a wonderful finale to the festival. And now I get to hand over to Penny for the final cheer.
Thank you. That's the way to go out with a bang with that panel. That was absolutely incredible. So thank you all so much. Leon's going to post the link to the evaluation form in the chat, our final evaluation form. Weekly pass holders, you're getting a mega form at some point, I think this evening. So I'm going to stop the recording so that I can do a whoop whoop end of festival off recording.